Chapter 606, Intimidation, Above the Gray Fog, Inside the Palace that Looked Like a Giant's Residence. Klein tapped the edge of the modeled table as his thoughts revolved around the strange die.
It can influence me without me realizing it. This is already somewhat similar to 008 from back then. It's just that one is right in front of me while the other is hidden. It's definitely a sealed artifact, and it's the kind that exists at the very pinnacle. Even if it's not a grade 0, it has to be a very special existence among grade 1s. I'm temporarily unable to interfere with matters regarding fate, but I can't just passively face it. With the passage of time, objects at the level of sealed artifacts will often cause more severe damage. It might begin to affect people around the chubby apothecary, such as me or all the passengers on the ship.
Klein thought over the matter seriously, without any solutions in mind. He decided to immediately return to the real world. He didn't know how to seal the die or how to reduce its influence, but he knew someone had a clue. It was the snake of Mercury, Will Auceptin, who was still inside his mother's womb as a fetus. Entering the master bedroom, he took out the paper crane in his wallet and placed it on the table. Klein took a look at the surface, which still had signs of being erased. He picked up a pencil and wrote a simple question. How do I deal with that die? He folded the paper crane back to its original form, stuffed it in his wallet, and went to the door of the servant's room before knocking on it 2 times. This wasn't in violation of Gehrman Sparrow's persona, because he was a gentlemanly madman. Of course, Klein was mainly afraid of bashing Dark Will to death by rashly opening the door. This was something that he had learned from the movie franchise Final Destination. In addition, Klein was also worried about witnessing something disgusting or unpleasant.
With the preferences Dark Will has exhibited, when he realizes that he's in extreme danger and unable to extricate himself from it, with waiting for death being the only option available to him, there's a non-zero chance of him pleasing himself to climax one last time.
Klein lampooned as he heard the chubby apothecary's weak reply,
"What's the matter?"
It's good that you aren't dead yet.
Klein carefully opened the door and leaned his body a little forward, looking at Dark Will and the opened ring box, which was sitting in front of him. He calmly asked,
What's the score?
Can't you check it from the papers yourself? Sports section.
Dark Will remained listless.
I'm asking about the die.
Klein simply added,
It's still at 3 points.
Dark Will first answered instinctively before turning his head and jumping up.
You believe me?
Klein didn't reply so as to prevent him from recalling how Gehrman Sparrow had been fooled by the die. He turned around and said in an unperturbed tone,
Bring the die outside.
All right. All right.
Dark Will and Harry cried out in joy almost at the same time. They either raised their arms or wings. After the chubby apothecary carefully carried the ring box out, Klein pointed at the coffee table and said,
Put it on there.
As he said, he sat on the sofa beside it. He placed his arms on his thigh and leaned forward to observe the strange die. On the surface, the die didn't seem strange in any way when it came to mysticism. The only difference from an ordinary die was that it was dyed in red, even for 3 points. Klein didn't touch it out of caution. He slightly straightened his body and looked at Dark Will, who was seated across him on a chair, as well as the fat owl, Harry, who was perched on the chair's back.
Describe the exact situation.
Dark Will didn't hide the matter any further as he said, with a smile which looked worse than crying.
This is an important sealed artifact in our organization. My mission is to send it to a particular person in Oravi Island. But, as you can see, it's extremely dangerous. It will roll itself even when there's no space for it to do so. When it rolls a 6, the wielder will be sufficiently lucky. Everything can be done with relatively easy success, just like how my clumsy lie was able to fool you.
Don't mention this matter. You will one day be taught a serious lesson because of that mouth of yours.
Klein listened with a stoic expression. Dark Will continued.
1 point means that the wielder will be extremely unlucky. Nothing will succeed. You wouldn't believe me even if I were to tell you the whole truth. 2 points should be bad luck of a lesser degree. But as for why, it would cause me to be struck by lightning. It's inexplicable. 3 points and 4 points are normal levels of bad luck and good luck. This can be confirmed. 5 points is the opposite of 2 points.
You aren't considered unlucky enough. Otherwise, I would have already beaten you up.
Klein thought and calmly instructed,
From this moment forth, both of you will take turns to monitor this die. Once it drops below 3 points, you are to inform me immediately.
Both of us?
Darkwill wore a blank look for a moment.
Including me?
The owl perched on the edge of the chair's back, raised its right wing. Klein leaned back into the sofa and crossed his right leg as he said calmly,
This will help in maintaining focus and energy.
With that said, he gestured at the owl with his chin.
You're up first.
My name is Harry.
The owl grumbled.
Harry.
Klein resisted the urge to laugh as he said to Darkwill,
Pull the bell and get an attendant here. From this moment forth, we will choose to have room service for our meals. Before reaching Oravi Island, you have to be in the living room at all times. You are not to go anywhere. Even if you wish to use the washroom, it will be when it's at 3 or 4. If you really can't hold it in, I'll give you a bucket.
Upon hearing Gehrman Sparrow give instructions with regularity and thoroughness, Darkwill calmed down a little at a time. He was no longer as horrified as before. The matter he was most worried about prior to this was that, firstly, Gehrman Sparrow would be enticed by greed and choose to kill him for the die. Secondly, this somewhat crazy and cold adventurer might be frightened by the die, and that he would choose to terminate the mission and stop providing protection. And now, Gehrman Sparrow didn't show any fear, and he even seemed very confident. Darkwill secretly sighed in relief and thought,
His performance was really professional. He isn't afraid at all. He can even escape the influence of the die and accept my explanation. He lives up to his name of being the powerful adventurer who easily hunted Wormtongue. He's definitely a powerhouse at the Pirate Admiral level.
Darkwill stood up and walked to the door to pull the service bell. Just as he returned to the sofa, he heard Harry's sharp screech.
It has changed. It has changed. 2 points.
Suddenly, Klein exerted strength in his legs as he rose up from the sofa without warning and rushed to Darkwill's side. Bang! As a gunshot rang from outside, Klein pulled Darkwill's arm, swung his arm backward, and shook his wrist, throwing the chubby apothecary to the side. At this point, in the wall opposite to where Darkwill was standing, there was a bullet hole.
Did a sailor's gun misfire? Or did the bullet ricochet when aiming at some seabird or something? Regardless of the situation, the chances of that happening are very low, yet.
Klein turned his head to the chubby apothecary.
Are you injured?
Darkwill shook his head with a lingering sense of fear.
I'm fine.
In the time that followed, Klein resolved more than 10 accidents, one after another. It included the sudden collapse of the chandelier in the room, a hammer dropped by a slipping maintenance worker headed straight for Darkwill's head, as well as Darkwill nearly dying from choking on a fishbone. These didn't seem like anything serious, but for Klein to remain highly focused, it was inevitable for him to be exhausted. Thankfully, the die automatically rolled to 4 points later, finally ending the hour, which was fraught with disasters.
No, I can't continue like this. Who knows if something will happen to me when I'm rescuing him?
Klein sent away the captain who came to apologize and said to Darkwill,
I'll sleep for half an hour. Both of you are to watch the die. Immediately wake me up when there's a problem.
The chubby apothecary and the owl nodded like a hungry woodpecker. Leaning back into the sofa, Klein used cogitation to quickly fall asleep, hoping to receive a reply from Will Septon. When he woke up in his dream, he heaved a sigh of relief when he saw the pitch-black, desolate plains. He followed the same old path and reached the depths of the black steeple. In the protruded ground surrounded by tarot cards, there were many new silvery lines that were densely written. Klein stopped walking and quickly read it.
It's called the Die of Probability. It's a sealed artifact of the highest level in our school of thought. I believe it can reach the standard of a grade 0 sealed artifact. It controls the probability of everything. 1 point will maximize the probability of unfavorable matters occurring to the target. 2 points will raise the probability of unfavorable matters greatly. This doesn't mean that 2 points is safer than 1 point. This is because once the probability is high enough, any accident can happen. 3 points is to increase the probability of unfavorable matters. It's the opposite for 4 to 6 points. Even for me, a being who can reset it to a certain extent, it's a rather dangerous sealed artifact. A demigod can be killed using it. But of course, it can also kill yourself.
I know, your contest with the die of probability is likely the equivalent to the battle between the god of save and load and the RNG gods.
Klein lampooned inwardly as he continued reading.
The die of probability has living characteristics. It always makes the wielder swing back and forth between having good and bad luck. If one isn't careful, it's possible to die from an accident. When it awakens to a certain degree, it will control the people and objects around the wielder, controlling the probability of their actions. Although it hasn't been confirmed, I suspect that given enough time, it will be able to influence the entire world, making every action of all life be determined by its score. Of course, this is excluding deities.
To put it simply, it's digitizing the entire world. This is definitely at the level of a grade 0 sealed artifact. It's extremely dangerous. How terrifying.
Klein couldn't help but frown as he eagerly continued reading.
To truly seal the die of probability is rather complicated. To put it simply, it's to use specific sealed artifacts to isolate it from the spirit world, astral world, and the real world. You can give it a try. Haha, I'll reveal my cards. I have long discovered that you can resist my prophetic senses. Perhaps you can use it to seal it. There's another way, but it can only briefly reduce its influence. However, this should be enough to send the die of probability to the hands of someone who can seal it. That method is to use the fact that it has living characteristics. Use an effective method to intimidate it. That way, it will behave, no calm down for a period of time. It will last about 12 hours before continuing. After repeated acts of intimidation, the influence it receives will decrease. After a week, it will mark you and madly control your probabilities. Finally, thank you for your help. Sincerely yours, Will Accepton.
As expected of a snake of fate, he has indeed discovered my uniqueness. Throwing the die of probability above the gray fog should be able to seal it. But the problem is that a grade 0 sealed artifact with living characteristics might influence the space above the gray fog and chase me away, making itself the owner. Such matters cannot be answered with divination. It will definitely be able to resist, just like 008.
Klein rejected the idea of using the gray fog. As the thoughts whirled in his mind, he suddenly had an idea. Klein quickly left his dream and woke up. He said to Darkwill,
I have a method of suppressing its influence.
What is it?
Darkwill asked in pleasant surprise. Klein didn't answer and picked up the die of probability, which had 4 points facing up, before entering the washroom.
What does he want to do? I remember that in some folklore, the way they treat evil objects is to throw sh*t. Ugh.
Darkwill didn't wish to think further. After entering the washroom and locking the door, Klein immediately set up a ritual to summon himself. Following that, he went above the gray fog and brought out the iron cigar case. Then he picked up the die of probability and opened the cigar case. Inside the cigar case was the all-black eye, which came from the marionettist. Under the darkness, Klein's face was cloaked in the shadows, and he watched with a deep and gloomy gaze as he brought the die of probability close to the strange eye. It was a beyonder characteristic which contained the true creator's mental corruption. The corners of his mouth cracked open as he revealed a genial smile and whispered to the die in his hand.
Here, let me treat you to a concert.
Chapter 607, Discovering an Abnormality. The window of the washroom was very high, preventing sufficient sunlight from shining in. It could only barely dispel the darkness, making everything seem gloomy. Klein moved the die of probability in his right hand to the all-black eye, and suddenly it shook. Then he threw the item into the other side of the wash basin, The milky white die rolled a few times before finally stopping with 4 red dots pointing up. Klein held back his unobvious smile and took a step to the side and picked up the die of probability again. He lowered his head and said in a gentlemanly manner,
You don't wish to listen to it? Let's do this. Give me an answer. 6 represents cooperation, while everything else represents rejection.
With that said, he threw the die of probability up and reached out to catch it. The milky white die fell straight down and rapidly rolled, showing 6 red dots.
Very good.
Klein praised with a chuckle. After throwing the all-black eye back above the gray fog, he turned to open the door to the washroom and slowly walked to the living room. Under Dark Will's and Harry's gaze, which was filled with anticipation, worry, curiosity, and puzzlement, he suddenly stopped and threw the die of probability out.
No.
No.
Dark Will and the owl cried out at the same time, afraid that a score of 3 points and below would happen. The latter subconsciously flew up to distance itself from the fatty, who might be struck by lightning. With a crisp tinkle, the milky white die rolled on the coffee table several times before fixing itself at 2 points. Just as the color in Dark Will's face drained, the die languidly rolled and fixed itself on 4.
For the next 12 hours, it will be relatively quiet.
Klein calmly sat down and began enjoying his breakfast, which had long turned cold.
He really had a solution?
Dark Will lowered his body and stared at the strange die on the coffee table. After nearly a minute, he couldn't help but extend his hand and throw the die, managing to roll a 6. Just as his palm left, the die moved by itself to 4.
How magical. What method did Gehrman Sparrow actually use? Did he really sh*T and soak the die inside? Ugh.
Dark Will decided to accept the outcome and stopped thinking of the reason. Otherwise, he suspected that he would end up vomiting. Looking up at Gehrman Sparrow, who was calmly spreading butter on his bread, Dark Will suddenly felt that with just a promise and 1,000 pounds to hire a bodyguard at this level was extremely worth it.
He can definitely be ranked at the same level as any pirate admiral. If a tycoon were to encounter a situation like mine, they wouldn't hesitate to hire him with half their wealth. Thankfully, I only paid 300 pounds. The rest will be borne by Teacher and the others.
Dark Will felt relieved when he realized that he didn't need to worry about the die's random rolling for the next 12 hours. He couldn't help but stand up and stretch his back. He walked to the window and opened the tightly shut window to see the sparse clouds scattered across the clear skies. The endless azure blue sky stirred as it reflected the bright sunlight like it had countless golden fragments scattered in it. This energized Dark Will as he felt a burden be lifted from his chest. Unlike Backland, which would only become warm at the end of February, the Rorstad archipelago was no longer plagued by the cold. Life had returned to this area, facing the sea and the blooming of flowers in warm spring. Klein, who had finished his bread, walked to a spot behind Dark Will and felt like he was an animal who had awoken from hibernation. He didn't recite the poem that flashed past his mind, as firstly, it didn't suit Gehrman Sparrow's persona, and secondly, it would probably make Dark Will reflect over Emperor Rosel's poetic talent. Until the evening, the die still didn't roll, but the weather had changed. Strong winds howled as dark clouds gathered. A storm was brewing. This was the most common danger at sea. Even if one took a safe sea route which had been traversed by others, one would occasionally encounter similar situations. It just wasn't as terrifying. Klein looked at the tall waves in the dark sky, and he felt as though the ship was cruising through a mountain valley. By the sides were tall, dark blue cliffs that could topple down at any moment. The intense pressure made a mid-sequence beyonder like him feel repressed. He even wished to pray to God, hoping that the liner would cruise through the storm safely. It's no wonder sailors, pirates, and merchants who live on the sea for extended periods of time can't help but respect the Lord of Storms. They would more or less believe in him. Klein sighed in silence. Although he didn't believe the storm that wasn't that powerful could bury a liner which was powered by both sails and steam engines, he still attached caution to the matter by praying to his alternate identity, sea god Kalvetua. He was afraid that the die of probability would suddenly go crazy during the storm and roll a 1, causing the ship to sink to the bottom of the sea. Therefore, he decided to make preemptive precautions. Klein did believe Snake of Fate Will Acceptance judgment that the die of probability would be quiet for 12 hours after the first Intimidation Act, but this was without any additional conditions. He believed that it was more likely that a sealed artifact with living characteristics would deal with situations like a person instead of rules. Hence, he had to take precautions for any troubles it might cause. Stealing a glance at Darkwill and the owl, who were looking somewhat uneasy due to the storm, Klein calmly said,
I'll take a nap. Continue watching the die. Take turns and do not relax.
All right.
Watching Gairman Sparrow enter the master bedroom, Darkwill walked to the side of the coffee table and sat down. As he stared at the die, he asked Harry,
What thoughts do you have now?
Harry flew around and mumbled.
Why am I not a petrel?
In the master bedroom, Klein went above the gray fog and summoned the sea god's scepter from the junk pile. He held the scepter with blue gems embedded at the top and quickly replied to his prayer. Klein didn't expend too much of his spirituality to calm the storm. This was firstly because they weren't too far from the surrounding seas of the Rorstad archipelago. Such an obvious and exaggerated supernatural phenomenon was easily able to attract the attention of Sea King John Cotman, who shared the same domain, or the storm priests on the ships. Secondly, he had to conserve strength to deal with the die of probability. What he did was simple. He augmented the ship with layers of Beyonder effects, allowing it to cruise through the storm stably without any risk of capsizing. Towards a sequence 5 or 6 Beyonder below the rank of demigod, to do something similar to a liner which had hundreds of people on board required plenty of preparations and a complicated ritual. It was only possible by exhausting them, but to a sea god of this domain it was all simple and easy.
A demigod already has inklings of a god.
Klein sighed and threw the scepter back into the junk pile, before silently disappearing from above the gray fog. In the time that followed, the ship bobbed up and down like a leaf in the wind. But no matter how terrifying or towering the dark blue waves were, nothing happened to it until the end of the storm. At 4 p.m. on Thursday, Backland, William Street. Fours Wall once again arrived here by carriage. She didn't sit in the coffee shop again. Instead, she strolled down the street and observed the pedestrians and surrounding buildings. She also took note of figures with special traits as material for her novel.
There really are a lot of foreigners. They're still mainly from Fasak and Intis. Heh. One of them is a barbaric and stocky white bear, while the other is a colorful, ostentatious rooster.
Fours chuckled silently to herself. At this moment, she came to the middle of William Street, where there was an abandoned chapel. Withered vines crawled over its walls, and gray stones were strewn everywhere. With the intention to not waste Mr. World's payment, Forrest deliberately approached it to check for any abnormalities. She circled around the chapel without discovering anything. Following that, she entered and avoided the disgusting shit and rotten things, and she quickly observed every corner. Suddenly, her gaze came to a stop as she frowned bit by bit. In a particular corner of the half-collapsed ruin, the ground had been dug up by someone. The pit wasn't too big or deep, and there were remnant traces of it being dug with fingers.
This should be considered an abnormality, right?
Forrest cautiously retreated and didn't do a detailed investigation. After walking through all of William Street, she immediately returned home and organized the abnormality and material she jotted down together. She then sacrificed it to Mr. Fool and asked him to hand it over to the world. Forrest didn't hide or conceal anything she saw, even if they didn't seem to have any superficial problems. This was because she knew very well that any abnormality would be judged by the world, and not by herself, who didn't understand the situation. In the ancient palace above the fog, Klein immediately began reading the report Miss Magician had submitted.
That abandoned chapel has signs of being dug up? The previous digging attempts had been dealt with by me and Miss Sharon. Who would dig it up again? Rafter Pound, that descendant of the Tudor family? He nearly died from the evil spirit's possession. Without any helpers, it's unlikely he would take further risks. Who could it be?
Klein thought for a moment, but he couldn't lock onto a suspect. All he could do was continue reading. While he read the notes written in a beautiful language, he acutely noticed a point.
There are many foreigners on this street. They are mainly from Faysac and Intis. It wasn't like that back when I went to William Street. Did a Faysac or Intis company recently open there? Faysac, Intis.
Klein ruminated over the two countries' names when he suddenly recalled something. The royal family of the Faysac Einhorn, the Einhorn family, and Intis, former royal family, the Sauron family, are both in control of the Hunter pathway, which is also the Red Priest pathway. It was two of the blood types which the evil spirit had designated as being capable of removing the seal. Together with the Medici family's descendants, which had been destroyed at Banzi Harbor, the three factions which held control over the Red Priest pathway are involved.
Banzi Harbor was destroyed, causing the Medici family's Beyonder characteristic to use some magical connection to contact the evil spirit who's suspected to be Red Angel. Hence, the members of the Einhorn and Sauron families were attracted? No, that's not realistic. If the Church of Storms didn't discover any Beyonder characteristics, they definitely would have noticed a problem in this. Another reason? The evil spirit is using another method to attract people from the Einhorn and Sauron families? What or who did it go through in order to do so? The number of people who know of the evil spirit's existence is only a handful. Me, Miss Sharon, as well as.
Amidst his racing thoughts, Klein suddenly thought of a possibility.
It was Rafter Pound, the descendant of the Tudor family, who had previously been possessed by the evil spirit. He had unknowingly become a slave of the evil spirit. He had secretly helped it spread the news, and the evil spirit had sought me and Miss Sharon's help to numb us into thinking that we are the only ones who can rescue it. For this, it didn't mind betraying its descendants.
Klein was alarmed as he felt like he had been fooled by the evil spirit. Chapter 608. Professional. The endless gray fog hung silently before a light scraping noise on the bronze table sounded. Klein changed his seating posture and began placing more weight on the details regarding the evil spirit. He was more and more convinced that Miss Sharon and himself had neglected the possibility of something happening to Rafter Pound.
This is a Beyonder power of the Red Priest pathway, conspirer? Furthermore, this is even closer to a common fraud. There's only the use of supernatural powers in the details. Therefore, even if I had arrived at the mysterious space above the gray fog, I would passively have my senses fooled. I would have only discovered the problem by proactively considering and analyzing the situation. If it wasn't for Mr. Azy, who knew of the evil spirit suspected to be the dead Red Angel Medici, I wouldn't have realized this problem. Nor would I have hired Miss Magician to seek out any abnormalities on William Street.
After a few minutes of contemplation, Klein conjured a pen and paper, preparing to use divination to confirm his theories. After deliberating for a moment, he finally penned the sentence for the dream divination, Baronet Rafter Pound's current situation. After putting down his dark red fountain pen, Klein held the piece of paper with the divination statement and leaned back in his chair. He first recalled the information he had regarding Rafter Pound before closing his eyes, chanting silently and entering cogitation. Klein's thoughts rapidly calmed down as he quickly entered a dream state. In a gray world, disconnected scenes flashed past before finally fixating on Unit 29 on Civilas Street. Inside the warm activity room, Rafter Pound was dressed in cotton pajamas, holding a wine cup with red liquid. He was standing silently by the window, looking at the Backland Police Station headquarters diagonally across the street. This baronet had gray sideburns and puffy eye sockets that were tainted with blackish-green colors. The wrinkles on his forehead and the corners of his eyes and mouth were so pronounced that it exceeded what someone in his 40s should look like. His pupils weren't dilated in a very serious manner, but they were abnormal. His cheeks were flushed red as he had a furtive smile. He looked slightly abnormal compared to the last time Klein met him.
Indeed, something is wrong with him.
Klein left the dream and began considering how he could deal with the evil spirit. Moss. Without a doubt, he had his usual train of thought for such matters. Under the situation where he was unable to contact Miss Sharon, his first reaction was to report the matter.
but how should it be reported?
Klein considered it seriously and conjured the world's figure and made him pray.
Through a reliable channel, pass this information to the Church of the Evernight Goddess and the Church of the God of Steam and Machinery. The information is, high-level spies from FASAC and Intis are gathered at William Street for unknown motives. Reward of £100.
This was the explanation Klein thought of after repeated consideration. Directly revealing the King of Angels, Red Priest, the Medici family, or the Tudor dynasty's ruin would indeed garner the attention of the churches and military, but it would also easily make Miss Magician, who reported the matter, to be targeted by the official organizations. There were huge risks involved. Not only was using high-level spies from FASAC and Intis are gathered at William Street relatively milder, something which ordinary beyonders had a chance of noticing, but it was also something that would make the churches and the military wary. They would send out the corresponding experts to employ the most effective methods. As for the subsequent fruits of the investigations, it was all thanks to their contributions and had nothing to do with the reporting party. Klein had considered getting Mr. Isaac to help, but he ultimately chose to abandon the thought. This was because the evil spirit was suspected to be a king of angels and was very dangerous. Mr. Isaac, who was still in the stage of recovering, might not be able to deal with it. After some thought, Klein turned the conjured scene into a stream of light and transmitted it to the crimson star representing the magician. Backland, Sherwood Borough. When Fours received the response from Mr. World, she was taken aback.
Those are high-level spies from FASAC and Intis?
She exclaimed to herself, believing that there was no way she could have inferred something like that with the information she had provided. However, she quickly felt at ease, believing that the reason why Mr. World had suspicions of abnormalities in William Street was precisely because he had received the corresponding intel of high-level spies. Once he confirmed the appearances of people from FASAC and Intis, it was easy for him to make such a conclusion.
Pass this information to the Church of Evernight and the Church of Steam? Isn't that a euphemistic way of saying report? Unfortunately, I won't be able to watch from the sideline, or I'm sure a great show would unfold.
Fours wasn't a stranger to reporting matters. After all, her housemate and good friend was a bounty hunter. She quickly had an idea, deciding to hand the matter of reporting the intel to the experienced Zio. When she came out of the bedroom, she saw Shio sitting on a sofa. She was flipping through documents about her target, raising her hand to grab at her messy blonde hair from time to time, and appearing extremely serious. Force casually picked up an item to embellish her motives and came over to the sofa. She handed over the item.
Here, have a piece of cake.
Shio glanced at the cake slathered with a layer of cream. Without losing focus, she raised her hand to grab it. At this moment, Force flipped her wrist, and the cake in her palm had turned into a golden decorative flower.
Surprised?
She asked with a smile. Shio couldn't help but roll her eyes.
Stop your performance. I prefer food.
All right. I have a matter for you to do. 70 pounds.
Force smiled as she sat down. After first dealing with the evil spirit's matter, Klein returned to the real world and held a ritual in passing. He brought the radio transceiver, which had been placed above the gray fog for several days, back to his first-class master bedroom. He lay in bed and used cogitation to recover his energy until he was awoken by the tapping sounds. When Klein opened his eyes, the crimson moonlight had already shone in, blanketing the dim room like a veil, as well as the radio transceiver, which was automatically spewing out illusory white paper.
This really feels like a horror film. A shame it's connected to a magic mirror without any moral integrity or bottom line.
Klein sat up and walked over. He saw lines of Loanese on the illusory white paper.
Honorable existence above the spirit world, your loyal and humble servant, Aerodes, has arrived and would like to greet you. Do you have something you would like to test me on?
Look at this, look. This is what I call smooth talking. This is what a professional is like.
In that instant, Klein really wished to pull Darkwill into the room to witness the magic mirror's art of communication.
I clearly have questions to ask it, but it becomes a situation of me testing it. and it even threw in a question.
Klein controlled the curling of his mouth as he replied in a deep voice.
Yes.
Please speak. The ignorant and limited Arotes is ready.
Amidst the tapping sounds, the illusory paper no longer produced Loanese, but instead produced a fawning, smiley face.
This is already the emergence of emoticons. This fellow evolves really quickly.
Klein directly asked,
Where can I obtain a mystical item which can steal the beyonder powers of others?
The tapping sound suddenly became intense as the illusory white paper quickly produced scenes like a screenshot from a movie. There were places which Klein was familiar with, such as Tianjin City's St. Selena Cathedral's Chanis Gate, the black-haired, green-eyed, handsome poet Leonard Mitchell, a middle-aged man who sat on a sofa smiling at the noble ladies opposite him, and a young, arrogant lady who was loitering in the sewers. There were a total of 12 scenes, and finally, a line of Loanese text appeared.
These are the ones that you can easily or conveniently acquire one from. There are a lot more, but they are either very complicated or troublesome, or they range at the highest levels which I cannot see clearly.
Not bad. He actually knows to help me filter. This is a fantasy and mystical version of Google.
Klein gently nodded and said, despite knowing the answer,
It's your turn to ask.
You have already answered.
Amidst the tapping, Erota's unsurprising answer appeared on the illusory white paper. Klein chuckled inwardly and asked,
Where will Leonard Mitchell be staying for the time being?
The tapping sounds became intense again as one scene after another appeared before Klein's eyes. It was a famous landmark in Backland, a towering Gothic bell tower with a bell of order hanging above. There was a road sign on the road with the words Pinster Street. It was Unit 7 along a row of terrace houses. In it, there was the extremely suave Leonard Mitchell wearing a black coat and red gloves. He was Klein's poet friend, who was reading through the dossiers of Lenevis and Kepham.
This fellow is in Backland, and he's investigating the Lenevis and Kepham cases? What the hell?
The corners of Klein's mouth twitched slightly as he carefully thought of the clues he left behind in those two cases.
The only clue is that Detective Sherlock Moriarty is involved in the two cases. If Leonard enters Daisy's dream, he should discover this point. But I already kept a beard and had a pretty good disguise back then. It's unlikely that he can recognize me in the rather blurry scene in the dream and portraits. As long as he doesn't recognize me, it doesn't matter. What has problems with Sherlock Moriarty have to do with me, Gairman Sparrow?
Klein retracted his thoughts and memorized Leonard Mitchell's current residence, 7 Pinster Street, Backland. He planned on entrusting the Moon Emlyn White to visit Leonard Mitchell the day after tomorrow and use the badge of the Hermits of Fate to purchase a mystical item.
I hope my dear poet friend has additional items to spare. If not, the price will definitely be at a premium.
Klein tersely answered and said to the radio transceiver,
It's your turn to ask.
He was honestly curious as to what a Rhodes would ask this time. Amidst the clacking sounds, the radio transceiver spewed out new illusory paper. On it was a question composed in Loanese.
Great Master, Leonard Mitchell has a huge secret. Do you wish to know?
This can also be considered a question?
Klein raised his head in amusement and surprise as he looked at the crimson moon which was silently illuminating the dark sea. Soon he honestly gave an answer.
Yes.
Chapter 609, Paying a Visit. Amidst the clacking sounds, the radio transceiver spewed out a brand new piece of illusory white paper under the crimson moonlight in the dim environment.
Inside, Leonard Mitchell resides an angel from the Zoroast family. He once changed my question.
Angel? There's an angel residing in Leonard's body? An angel from the 4th epoch Zoroast family? Although Klein was mentally prepared to hear an incredible secret, he was still shocked by what a Rhodes divulged. He was deeply concerned and surprised as well. An angel referred to beyonders at sequence 1 or 2, making them rather close to the state of a true god. They had all sorts of mystical characteristics, and they could even influence low-sequence beyonders of the same pathway to a certain extent and range. They were mighty figures who stood at the pinnacle of the real world. In the various churches, only their popes, pontiffs, patriarchs, as well as certain legendary ascetics, were grounded angels. Therefore, Klein believed that being latched onto by a parasite of this level wasn't a good thing. In the dark second epoch, the angels all had their divine names, and they were subsidiaries to the ancient gods.
I haven't indirectly or directly interacted with many angels. Blasphemer Amon, Calamity Queen Kohinnim, the evil spirit suspected to be Red Angel Medici, Tail Devourer Ouroboros as described by Little Sun, Miracle Invoker Zeratul from Roselle's Diaries, son of the Creator, Adam, Hermes, who cannot be confirmed if he's an angel or not, Snake of Fate, Will Auceptin, who's still inside his mother's womb. Apart from the last two, the others appear to be very evil. Even the words they leave behind might make the reader go crazy or lose control. Would my dear poet ultimately end up as a sacrificial item of this angel parasite? This can explain why he thinks of himself as the protagonist of a play, the special one, and he was willing to help me hide my secret. The Zoroast family is in control of the Marauder pathway, which is the pathway that can steal the beyonder powers of others. That's why Leonard was able to find and participate in the gathering of the Hermits of Fate. It's no wonder he offered to use Blood Vessel Thief. It's because he has a grandpa to help him. He was able to instantly steal Magos's most potent power. What Hermits of Fate? They're just a bunch of thieves and frauds. At best, the target of their theft and fraud is that of time and fate. In short, my dear poet's grandpa isn't a good person. I have to find a chance to warn him. But here comes the problem. They're always together. Any warning will only expedite the problem.
Klein's thoughts raced, but he ultimately failed to come up with an option he can act upon. All he could do was temporarily shelve the matter and plan on asking Mr. Azik and Snake of Mercury Will Auceptin to see if they had any solutions. In those few minutes, he even thought of using Blasphemer Amon. To put it simply, it was to divulge information to the son of the Creator that the angel from the Zoroast family was residing in Leonard Mitchell's body, getting him to eat up the parasite. According to what Klein knew, the Amon family supported the Tudor Empire during the Fourth Epoch, while the Zoroast family belonged to the Solomon Empire, making the two enemies. Furthermore, according to the law of Beyonder characteristics conservation, powerhouses from the same pathway would have greater conflicts the higher their sequence was. This was akin to the battle between the two Snakes of Mercury. Unfortunately, this solution was restricted by reality and was ultimately abandoned by Klein. This was because he didn't know where to find Blasphenomen. Secondly, he was afraid that the battle at the level of angels would directly destroy Leonard Mitchell. And thirdly, a powerful Amon might be a very bad and serious matter.
I'll first get Imlan to attempt the transaction and observe the actual situation. I can decide on what to do when I know more.
Klein retracted his thoughts and said to the radio transceiver, which was connected to a Rhodes,
Ask your question.
The clacking of the radio transceiver became increasingly brisker as the illusory white paper was gently spewed out.
No, there's no need. This is an addendum to my question, which doesn't need to abide by the rules. Great Master, I sense a special item outside your room, but I am unable to see through it. Can you tell me what it is?
This magic mirror is impressive. It seems to be able to see everything. It just suffers from interference when it deals with high-level matters as though there's a mosaic.
Klein calmly replied,
Die of probability.
Amidst the taping sounds, Rhodes presented new words on the illusory piece of white paper.
So it's that thing. Great Master, you can ask your question.
Klein thought for a moment before saying,
What do you have to mention regarding the die of probability?
At this point in time, the radio transceiver seemed to brighten up and no longer looked as gloomy as before. The speed at which illusory white paper spewed out slowed down.
It's a fellow that's especially petty and bears grudges. Master, you have to quickly give it to someone else. It's an item formed from the uniqueness of the Wheel of Fortune. You can give it to any other Snake of Fate, and they will be very grateful. In short, it's not suitable to be your servant. The aura is dissipating. Your loyal and humble servant, Erodes, has no choice but to leave. Finally, let me praise you once again, my great master, the ruler above the spirit world. Bye-bye, Tilde.
Uniqueness. The die of probability is actually the uniqueness of the monster pathway. This is the first time I'm encountering a so-called uniqueness. It really is terrifying that can digitize the entire real world. The monster pathway is also called the Wheel of Fortune pathway. Sequence 0 is the Wheel of Fortune.
Klein looked at the radio transceiver, which had returned to normal, and he temporarily reined in his thoughts. He didn't harbor any greed towards the die of probability. This was because it wasn't part of the seer pathway, and it came with extremely terrifying negative side effects. He was also afraid that, with time, this die which bore grudges would attract tail devourer Ouroboros over.
Even if this thing can be isolated and sealed when placed above the gray fog, there's a high chance of it digitizing the entire mysterious space. In the future, the tarot gatherings might end up becoming a tabletop role-playing game.
Klein had never come into contact with items of this level before, so he was unable to determine what would happen if he were to throw the die of probability above the gray fog. He decided to continue intimidating the die, and he would successfully send it to Oravi Island, where there would be Life School of Thought members who had the means to seal it. As for the problem of the mission exceeding the payment he would receive, he didn't mind it. This was because the greatest benefit he would gain was the friendship of the Snake of Fate, Willow Septon. Backland Harvest Church. Emlyn White held a strange badge which was the size of an eyeball and chuckled inwardly.
The world sure is long-winded. Isn't it just finding a nighthawk named Leonard Mitchell at Pinster Street in Northborough? He even specially emphasized that the person has a secret and that there's a high chance of me being pulled into a dream. This is showing doubt in my abilities.
Emlyn stood up and changed into a tailcoat and white shirt. He then turned his head to look out the window.
Heh, he has a secret, while I have mine. I dare bet that Lord Nibs or other earls are secretly watching me. If anything were to happen, they will definitely provide me with help to a certain degree. Being pulled into a dream.
Emlyn contemplated for a few seconds before using the materials which were rich in spirituality to concoct a blue medicine. Putting away the bottle and medicine, he picked up a silk top hat and walked out of the break room. After bidding farewell to Bishop Yutrovsky, he left the Harvest Church. It was still morning, but Backland's sky was gloomy. There was a faint fog that spread like water. Emlyn squinted his eyes and wore his hat, murmuring to himself.
The sunlight is a little blinding.
He hailed a rental carriage and went straight for the steam metro station. He spent 6 pence on a first-class ticket to Northborough. This saved him a lot more time than heading straight there. About 40 minutes later, he arrived at his destination and stood outside the door of 7 Pinster Street. Emlyn politely rang the doorbell and patiently waited for a minute. Just as he was about to write a note and stuff it into the hole beneath the door to schedule a better time for a visit, he suddenly heard languid footsteps approaching.
Doesn't sound like a servant.
Emlyn nodded indiscernibly and took out the medicine he had concocted in advance and cleanly drank it. Then he watched the door open and saw a black-haired, green-eyed man appear before him. He was dressed in homewear, a white shirt and black trousers. His shirt was untucked, allowing it to flutter gently in the wind. Amidst his suaveness were hints of uninhibited freedom.
Although he's a believer of Evernight, I have to say that his looks are barely comparable to us Sanguine.
Emlyn took off his hat and gently raised his chin.
Good morning. Are you Mr. Leonard Mitchell?
Leonard frowned indiscernibly as he looked at the handsome, red-eyed gentleman. He raised his hand to cover his mouth and indifferently yawned.
You are?
A visitor. I have something I would like to seek your help on.
Emlyn didn't reveal his identity as he smiled with a rather obvious arrogance. This attitude gave Leonard a baffling sense of familiarity. It was as though he had seen his former self, the person who always thought of himself as being the most special, the protagonist of this era. He cleared his throat and said,
I'm only an ordinary citizen. I do not accept missions. If you have any issues, then you can find a private detective.
Emlyn White smiled and said,
This matter is something only you can complete.
He looked to his sides and continued.
I wish to purchase a mystical item that can steal the beyonder powers of others.
Leonard's eyes focused as he asked in a deep voice.
Who are you?
At this moment, Emlyn didn't immediately answer. Instead, he surveyed his surroundings and clicked his tongue with a smile.
Impressive. I nearly failed to realize that I had been pulled into a dream.
He wasn't in a rush to leave as he took out the small badge he received from the world in front of Leonard Mitchell's solemn expression. Leonard took a glance as his expression eased slightly. He cocked his head slightly and paused for a few seconds. Silently, Emlyn White saw the scene around him rapidly shatter and vanish like shattering glass. Leonard sneered and pointed inside the house.
Let's talk inside.
Chapter 610, Throwing the Die. Upon hearing Leonard Mitchell's invitation, Emlyn didn't show any fear. He held his top hat and wore a subtle smile before entering the house without any qualms. He didn't take off his coat, as a potions professor often brought several supplementary items. It wouldn't look pleasant once the concealment of these items was gone. Emlyn sat down with his starched tailcoat, leaning back into the support as he leisurely said,
Actually, there's no need to go through the trouble. If you have it, name the price. Otherwise, just frankly say so. Of course, I'm very certain you have one.
He chuckled as his bright red eyes reflected Leonard Mitchell's figure that didn't mind the tidiness of his getup. The feeling of me knowing you have a secret, with you not knowing anything about me, left Emlyn extremely pleased, as he felt a strong sense of superiority. Leonard used his fingers to comb his raven-black hair and casually sat on the chair opposite Emlyn. He didn't show any panic or puzzlement as he said with a smile,
At the very least, I need to know who wants it.
Perhaps it's me, or perhaps it's my friend.
Emlyn tipped his chin as he smiled gently. Leonard squinted his eyes as he cocked his head, as though in thought. Finally, he laughed.
All right. Since you've already taken out that badge, I'll answer you frankly. I do have a mystical item that can be used to steal the beyonder powers of others, but I only have that one item. If you wish to buy it, £7,000. No negotiation.
£7,000? A mystical item of this kind is that expensive?
Although he didn't have to pay for it, Emlyn was still shocked. He nearly failed to maintain his bearing as a sanguine. He automatically converted how much money that could be used to exchange for dolls and doll dresses. Pocked. After 2 seconds of thought, Emlyn revealed a smile and said,
I'll consider it. I'll answer you in 2 days.
Sure.
Leonard curled the corners of his lips. After leaving 7 Pinster Street, Emlyn hired a rental carriage as though nothing had happened as he headed for the steam metro station in Northborough before heading back to the bridge at Southborough. Taking off his hat, he looked back at the street, which had carriages and pedestrians passing through. Emlyn chuckled and took a step into the Harvest Church. In between a tree and a black street lamp, an inconspicuous shadow suddenly moved, revealing the black-haired, green-eyed Leonard Mitchell. His appearance was silent, but it didn't garner the attention of any pedestrians. Leonard frowned slightly as he muttered to himself.
Someone from the Church of Earth Mother?
He paused for 2 seconds before leaving Rose Street, where the Harvest Church was situated.
£7,000? Why doesn't he just go rob a bank?
Above the gray fog, Klein, who had received the feedback from Emlyn, nearly blurted out. As Gehrman Sparrow, he had previously said something similar, but the two situations and the mood was completely different. Using the bounty of the Golden Dream's third mate, Flowery Bowtie Jodison, as a reference, Klein inferred that a similar mystical item was worth about £5,000. Even if there was a premium, it would have maxed out at £6,000. Who knew that Leonard Mitchell would directly ask for £7,000?
Could it be an item left behind from a high-sequence Beyonder, making the act of stealing Beyonder powers just one of its effects? No, if that's really the case, the price would start from £10,000. My dear poet, why didn't I know you as a profiteering merchant? You clearly exhibit a free and easy demeanor, and showed no interest in money.
Klein couldn't help but sigh. Since he had a clue, and saw a glimmer of hope, and how it was something that could be resolved with money, Klein didn't wish to seek out other channels to prevent any mishaps from happening. He quickly calculated his wealth and discovered that it was an acceptable price.
Including the £300 advance from the apothecary, the £5,400 bounty from Wormtongue, and the cash I got from the bodies, and subtracting the £200 to be paid to Miss Magician, I have a total of £12,767 in cash and 5 gold coins. This isn't including my 3 soldi and 8 pence in change. In addition, Miss Justice will pay the £2,000 she owes me before the end of the week, as well as the £1,800 for the psychiatrist's characteristic. I'm actually richer than I thought I was. Even in Backland, I can be considered a tycoon.
Klein inhaled and didn't hesitate any further. He made the cash fly out from the junk pile and land on the table. He carefully counted £7,500 in cash and placed them aside. £7,000 for the mystical item and £500 for Emlyn's hazardous pay.
Sigh. After going through all the effort to go past 10,000, more than half of it will be gone in an instant.
Klein conjured the world and made him pose in a praying manner to inform Emlyn that there were no problems with going through with the transaction. 15 minutes later, a ritual was to be held to receive the bestowment from Mr. Fool. In addition, Klein also made the world warn Emlyn to not be in a rush to complete the deal after getting the cash. He had to wait until tomorrow. This was because he was afraid that the angel from the Zoroast family inside Leonard Mitchell would sense the gray fog's aura on the cash. He wanted an airing process, just like back when he gave Emlyn the badge. 15 minutes later, Klein glanced at the cash pile, which had shrunk by more than half, and sighed before returning to the real world. It was already 10:40 on a Friday. They were about 8 hours from Oravi Island.
It's time to intimidate the die of probability again.
Klein muttered, held the ritual, and brought out the iron cigar case which contained the all-black eye. He guessed that Dark Will would suspect something, so he deliberately brought the die to the washroom to deal with it. Seeing the die of probability calm down once again, Klein quickly dealt with the all-black eye and the iron cigar case. After heaving a long sigh of relief, he did a silent count of the time.
It should be enough to last until Dark Will hands it to the contact. There's no need to deal with it again.
With this in mind, Klein began to consider another problem with a certain degree of concern.
The all-black eye has appeared in front of the true creator before, and it has his mental corruption. To take it out once every few hours might cause him to lock onto me, allowing him to send powerhouses to seek me out. However, it was only 1 or 2 minutes each time, so the problem isn't that serious. Even if he senses it, their estimate of the area wouldn't be too precise. Sigh, when it involves the true creator, there's no way to determine things with divination. I can only raise my guard. Thankfully. This is the last time, and it will take only about 8 hours to reach our destination. Why am I raising flags for myself? Pui, pui, pui. I wasn't thinking of anything.
Klein picked up the die of probability and returned to the living room and saw the chubby apothecary slumped on the reclining chair, looking completely exhausted. As for the owl, Harry, it looked like it was brimming with energy, as though it didn't need any rest.
These are the different traits that different creatures gain from taking the same potion? At the very least, Miss Justice has never mentioned that she doesn't need sleep. It's a uniqueness that comes about because of an owl's biological makeup? Sigh. I don't know much about owls. Indeed, I'm just a keyboard warrior who is only a jack of all trades.
Klein sat on the sofa and placed the milky white die into the ring box and patiently waited for evening to arrive when the ship was scheduled to dock. Time ticked by as the sun gradually set in the west. At this point in time, Klein, who had his eyes closed, suddenly sat up, having sensed an extreme danger befall the area. It had exceeded a seer's spiritual intuition and the clown's intuition for danger. It seemed to stem from the formless gray fog which strangely rippled around him.
An enemy, Tail Devourer Ouroboros, or the Aurora Order Saint.
Klein opened his eyes as he began considering countermeasures with an abnormally serious expression. Any mistake in a time such as this would require him to consider matters of being resurrected. As for Dark Will and Harry, there was absolutely no way for them to be spared. In the beginning, he hoped that the visitor could only vaguely sense a general area and might not find him or the die of probability. However, when he considered how he was on a ship with no one around on the sea, it wasn't too hard to lock onto a target. The problems would only become worse when that happened, with giving up being the only choice. Above the liner, space was suddenly torn open as an invisible door filled with complicated symbols appeared. Two pale hands reached out from the door and suddenly pulled backwards, allowing his entire body to walk out. He wore a black bonnet and a classic dark robe, a favorite among elders. However, he didn't look past 40. His brown hair was slightly curled, which seemed abnormally hard. Countless illusory images darted across his dark eyes, as though layers after layer of chaotic worlds were hidden within. As Klein's sense of danger intensified, just the change in his expression frightened Dark Will and Harry enough for them to freeze. He didn't hesitate as he followed the plans he had made for such situations. He leaned forward and picked up the die of probability, Klein said in a deep and soft voice, and he threw out the milky white die.
Determine the outcome of the malefic visitor who just arrived. I want 1 point.
He subconsciously prayed to the goddess, hoping that the die, which had recently been intimidated, was obedient enough and played a meaningful role. Meanwhile, he appeared extremely calm, to prevent the die from sensing his anxiety and take the opportunity to cause trouble. As the die of probability rolled several times while producing clinking sounds, it fixed at the blood-red 1 point. Above the liner, the black-robed man, who didn't look 40, had the entire liner reflected within his eyes. He emanated his spirituality and scanned the surroundings. He extended his hand to grab the space in front of him as he suddenly pulled a nearly invisible door. The powerhouse stepped in and vanished from the spot. A message. Inside the first-class cabin, Klein immediately felt the danger distancing itself from him. He couldn't help but heave a sigh of relief. He looked at the die of probability on the coffee table and couldn't help but sigh inwardly.
If this die didn't have such a negative side effect and could be utilized to its full extent, it would be a divine artifact, as expected of a grade 0 sealed artifact, as expected of the uniqueness of the monster pathway.
Only at this point in time did Dark Will find his courage again, as he carefully asked,
What just happened?
Klein maintained his posture and calmly replied,
There's no need for you to know.
I understand. The more I know, the greater the danger I'll be in.
Dark Will wiped the cold sweat from his face. There weren't any more accidents in the next few hours. After the sun went below the horizon and the sky became completely dark, Klein finally saw a towering lighthouse appear not too far away.